I'm going to talk to you about the 4 most critical processes on the planet Earth. All these processes work in the forest, they work in the grassland, they work all over the globe, all over the planet. I did not understand that. All these processes have to be working on every field, every part of my farm. It was when I read Ellen Savory's book on these basic processes, and I began to realize, oh no, I didn't understand these basic concepts. And for some reason, I treated the forest and the grassland separate from my farm. How ridiculous is that? My farm came from the forest and from the prairie. Every farm came from those ecosystems. I didn't have that basic understanding. Now that I understand how important those processes are, I have to make sure that I farm like nature does. She's always covered with a living plant. She always has a living skin. Nature uses biology and life to carry out these natural processes. The first process is photosynthesis. It's about the sun and the plant. Without the plant capturing light energy and converting it into chemical energy that feeds the soil microbes, without that process, there would be no life. The more we have living plants capturing sun and leaking liquid sun, all these hundreds of compounds, you build aggregates. An aggregate is that pore space created by fungi, bacteria, and plants. They keep that soil open. It takes a lot of energy to build aggregates. Plants can use 40 to 70% of their energy, and they leak into the soil to feed fungi and bacteria to create aggregates. So it was very critical for me to understand living plants as long as possible. The other thing is I was very careful how I managed my grazing animals. If you overgraze and you take too much from the plant, you hurt the canopy and you hurt those incredible leaves, which are kind of like solar panels. So the more you take from the leaf, the more energy you take from the plant, the less aggregates you can build. I also understood that if I removed hay all the time, I take too much energy from the plant. And if I take too much energy from the plant because of overhaying, I also affect the organisms. The second process is the water cycle. We cannot have a water cycle without the sun. The sun's energy creates evapotranspiration. 60% of our rain comes from the ocean. 30 to 40% of our rain comes from inland. That is plants and soils evapotranspiring, creates humidity, also forms rain. The water cycle starts with this little droplet, and bacteria are present in there. And when the raindrop lands on the land, it ends with the formation of an aggregate that is also created by life, by fungi, by bacteria. You cannot have a functioning water cycle without an aggregate. You can have no infiltration without those aggregates. Without aggregates, the soil will not have this dynamic living skin. Aggregates are formed and they get consumed. They last about 27 days in our soils. So we have to build aggregates all the time. Aggregates are formulated by plants, fungi, bacteria, these living organisms, and a little bit of chemistry. Aggregates are formed by life, soil life. Look at that. Oh, this is amazing. Look at that, Gabe. Look at all the aggregation right here. The microbes, this is their habitat. They change it. I did not understand that until I went and saw that happen on Gabe's ranch. that he no longer used tillage. He used living plants to feed this system. Then I started to begin to realize the soil's alive. It's always been alive. It's not a chemistry set. It's a living, complex ecosystem. I thought soils were just a geological matrix of chemistry and physics. I forgot the most important part, the soil life. It was the soil life that exudes biochemistry that changes inorganic chemistry. When I understood that the soil was alive, it changed everything for me. It changed the way I looked at my farm. It changed the way I understood the soil, and that I had to protect it, and I had to feed it, and I had to nurture it, and I had to be very careful how I used my tools of tillage and pesticides. I had to understand it. I also had to understand that I'm a part of it. When we understand that our soil is alive, we change our practices completely. Without the water cycle, we can't have a nutrient cycle. The water must enter into the soil and infiltrate, and the soil microbes live in those films of water. Soil microbes are subaquatic organisms. When the water enters a well-aggregated soil, that means we have a great balance of air and water. This allows the microbes to function and carry out their processes. That means we'll have a better balance of nutrients. We won't have ponding, because you won't have it on top of the soil because it will infiltrate. Well-aggregated soils have more organic matter, so they hold nutrients better. You don't have to keep putting lime and fertilizers on them, because good aggregated soils self-heal, self-organize, self-regulate. You'll have less problems with weeds, because when your soil nutrients are balanced, you'll have less weeds manifest in your soil. The more tillage you do, the more you destroy those aggregates, which also facilitates weed production. When you have good soil aggregation, you increase yields because you have good soil structure. When we don't have aggregation, the soil cannot breathe. There's no oxygen entering the soil, and there's no CO2 leaving the soil. It creates a crust. Aggregation is like pores in your skin. It's alive. So we need aggregation. Also, if we don't have aggregation, the water does not enter into the soil. I tell people, we don't have a runoff problem in this country. We have an infiltration problem. So water has to enter inside the aggregate. If we get no water in the aggregate, no nutrient cycling. If we get no nutrient cycling, the plant does not get fed. It is very critical to get water into the soil. No water, no life. It's just as simple as that. Then also, if we have no aggregation, that piece of equipment cannot be held up. It is those glues, those biotic substances that hold the sands and silts and clays open, that gives structure. We need structure, and we need pore space. That pore space is habitat. It's habitat for those living organisms, and they swim in these beautiful pockets of pore spaces. Also, if we have a very well aggregated soil, you have less problems with disease and pathogens, because healthy soils regulate themselves. When we have poorly aggregated soils, we lose nitrogen, and we make it an environment for pathogens and disease. Nature is self-healing, self-organizing, self-regulating, just like our bodies. If you don't have that aggregation, it can't heal itself. It can't regulate itself. It can't organize itself. Those aggregates is that organization. One of the most critical things for building soil aggregates is a living plant. The plant is always creating, and the microbes creating that aggregation. Then you have that self-regulating mechanism. You have that self-organizing mechanism. Our bodies do the same. All those have to be present for our bodies to work and also for the soil to work. We forget that life is dynamic, and we want to put it into this little box. It doesn't work that way. It's always changing. It's dynamic. It's unpredictable, and it's okay. It's good to understand that. What's really hurt us, we try to control nature. We try to force her. We forget relationship. Understand it, nurture it, love it, collaborate with it. Don't force it into this box. I was taught yield, yield, yield. And I was going to use my tools of tillage, chemicals, pesticides to force it, to make it submit. Was the wrong concept. Now I understand nurture, collaborate, synergize, mimic it, love it. It was years ago I realized there was a major problem going on farm communities. My neighbors were going broke. The water was not getting clean, and I could not put my finger on it. I could not understand what was going on. I realized that my neighbors did not understand how their soils work, or either did I. I did not have a good grasp of the basic 4 processes. I didn't understand how important it was to capture sun, light energy. I didn't understand how the water cycle worked. I didn't even understand how the nutrient cycle worked. And worst of all, I didn't understand the power of life. I didn't realize it is life on this planet that helps facilitate those other processes. And what was the result? Broken homes, broken communities, unhealthy people, unhealthy plants, unhealthy animals, unhealthy climate. I did not realize it all started with the soils. Our soils were not healthy. The last process, I call it the cycle of life. That's where a community of organisms, insects, plants, animals, transfer genetic information, they transfer nutrients, they transfer energy from organism to organism. All these 4 processes are connected. You cannot separate them. The moment you take one out, there is no life. Now that I understand how soils work, I see an agriculture that is a renewal agriculture, a renewal of life. Now I see hope for communities, for farmers, because they can have financial freedom. They don't have all the stress because they're not buying all these chemical inputs. I see hope. I see how families and communities are becoming healed because now the soil is healed.